All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name's Randy Greenwell, and we're here for the Marching Arts Educators second Wednesday's session. And I'm going to be introducing my guests tonight. We have some special guests with us tonight. We have two individuals that are going to talk about a couple of new webinar communities that we're going to be launching here very, very soon. And our first guest that I want to introduce before we get started with our session is Mr. David Vanderwalker. David, take it away.
Greetings, everybody. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Dr. David Vanderwalker. I'm a 32-year music educator, and I've had the privilege of serving as an arts administrator and a band director at the middle school, high school, and college level. I've been involved in BOA Regional Championship and Grand National Finalist bands, and both my bands at Harrison and Georgia State University participated in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And a shout out, I just saw Carmel's going sometime soon, I think maybe. Yeah, that's exciting. So my grandfather would have turned 100 years old this past month, and he was my beginning band director. And he often said, the role of the music teacher has changed a lot over the years. Well, I've taken that a step further and stated that I believe that the modern music educator is a CEO of a people-oriented small business with a serious music problem. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm serious about making music, but I believe first and foremost, we are in a people business. You know, as band directors, we wear, well, let's be honest, too many hats, yes? And if we can spend 30% of our day making music, I would say that was a great day. Are you with me on that? Yeah. I find that one of our biggest challenges as band directors is that we weren't trained to be CEOs, yet somehow we need to help our team be more business-minded. So I'm super excited now as a Conn-Selmer clinician and author of 2 booster-related books that the Conn-Selmer Division of Education is going to help us turn our booster clubs into a people-oriented small business by launching a new parent booster community similar to this one you're attending tonight with the Marching Arts community. And so we will be offering a free practical help starting next week for your team and your booster board as we launch our first director and parent booster training webinar Wednesday, May 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So I hope you'll encourage your team to attend along with your executive board as we examine lessons that we can learn from great companies like Amazon or FedEx and how they turn their visions into well-executed business models, and discuss ways your booster clubs can articulate your vision with effective teams well-suited for specific tasks. So this is going to be ever more important as we rebuild after the pandemic. So this session is titled Bridging the Gap from Inspiration to Execution. So I hope your team can join us on the 19th for a free webinar at 8 p.m. And there's also one more first time ever. We're going to have a free 3-hour workshop for all the directors in your teams who register for booster clubs as part of Conn-Selmer Connect. So it's part of the schedule, first time ever, a 3-hour workshop. So I hope you'll consider those 2 opportunities coming up. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, David. Appreciate you being on tonight to launch that. And Rania, our operations manager, is also posting in the chat the registration for that session. I'd also like to introduce Dr. William Irvin, who's our new educational support manager in the Southeast. How you doing tonight, William?
I'm doing well. It's good to see everybody. If we have not met before, I'm Dr. William Irvin, and I currently serve as the educational support manager for the Southeast territories for Conn-Selmer, and one of the directors of our newest community, the Hbcu Collective. And I am just excited to invite you to be a part of what we have going on for our Hbcus. We have our first webinar coming up on May 26th, and it's going to be phenomenal. We're going to be talking about preserving jazz at Hbcu institutions. And we have 3 dynamic panelists. We have Ms. Roxanne Stevenson, who is the director of bands at Chicago State University. We have Mr. Robert Griffin, who's the associate professor of jazz studies at Florida A&M University. And we have none other than Grammy nominated artist Tia Fuller, who is also one of our headlining performers for Conn-Selmer Institute Connect. So definitely come and hang out with us and learn some more about jazz, what it has been in HBCUs and what we want it to be as we move forward and we add to the curriculum. We really want you to also join our Facebook group. We just started a Facebook group last week and we are already up to 145 members, and we're just missing one thing. We're missing you. So if you support HBCUs, if you want to be a part of knowing how these historically Black colleges and universities have made it and how we're going to still persevere, make sure you come out and just hang with us, learn from us, and be a part of us, support us, and we'll all make music together. Thank you so much, Randy, for having us on tonight, and we look forward to having a great session tonight.
Wow, thanks, William. That looks like a great session. I'm so glad as a fellow jazz musician that you guys are doing that. That's awesome. It's going to be a great session.
Absolutely.
Very cool. All right, well, let's get down to work. I want to first introduce our two panelists tonight. We have Marie Czapinski, who is a world famous Bands of America, DCI, and WGI adjudicator, as well as a designer, and Mr. Richard Saucedo, who is the retired director of bands at Carmel High School and composer, also a DCI judge, designer, and composer and arranger. So I'm going to delve into some public service announcements first, because I know we're all going on summer break soon, right? For whatever that happens to be for most band directors, which usually isn't too long, but I'm sure you're going to take somewhat of a mental vacation. Hopefully you are. But moving forward, next month in June, we have Kyle Young from Carmel High School, who's the associate director of bands there and a woodwind expert. He's going to present all things woodwind for marching band, and that'll be the second Wednesday of June. I believe that's June 9th. And then moving forward through the summer months and all the way into the fall, we have some really great topics coming up. Physical conditioning for the marching band, the Hbcu marching band experience, rehearsal roadmap, the show is taught. Now, what do we do for the next 3 months? Transitioning from marching. So we're performing inside this weekend. What do we do about our sound design and our miking? And then, so we're transitioning from marching season to concert season. How do we handle that? And finally, in December, a guide to winter ensembles, keeping the main thing the main thing. So we're going to try to be seasonal with our approaches to these webinars and try to make them relevant to you as you go through your seasons, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. I'd also like to bring your attention, and Ron, you'll put this up in the chat. As William had mentioned and David had mentioned, our Conn-Selmer Institute's taking place June 14th through the 17th. On the 17th, we're going to be focusing on the marching arts. And we've got a great panel put together for you of individuals. If I said all these people were going to be in the same place at the same time on the same day, I'd bet you'd be there. John Meehan, Jeff Young, Dr. Shelby Chipman, Chip Krotz, Rosie Miller-Queen, Timmy Zachary, Scott Johnson, Kyle Young, Tony Lehman, Brian Dinkle, Richard Saucedo, Tim Lutzenheiser, and yours truly. And Lindsay Vento as well. We're going to be having some great sessions, and we're also adding a surprise guest. He's not going to be a surprise now because I'm going to tell you who he is. Where is it at? There it is. Scott Chandler. Scott Chandler is going to be with us. He's going to do kind of a fireside chat for about a half hour with us, and you're going to be able to get some questions in and get some answers, okay? And then finishing up the day on the 17th, there'll be a concert by the Blue Devils, Drum and Bugle Corps, and there'll be some interactive sessions, question answer sessions. We've got a whole parallel track of student leadership that's going on and booster stuff, as David said, that's going on. It's going to be a really exciting day. And all of the other days that are packed into CSI that week are just absolutely amazing. Clinicians, off the chart, great. I just can't imagine a better professional development. The best part of this is going to be, if you can't be there that week, you can watch this. If you register, and that registration link is going to be posted by Rania. If you do that, you'll be able to watch the sessions up to about 90 days after the actual sessions take place live and in person. So great opportunities, no excuses out there, folks, to get better this summer. All right, so we decided today to have Richard and Marie in to talk about affect, the all-time great conversation. The question for the century, right, is what is affect, and understanding it and kind of wrapping our brains around it. And I want to start out by just asking Richard and Marie to dispel one myth about affect judges. Dispel one myth about affect judges.
Go ahead, Marie.
I think one myth would be that their minds are made up before they even start. General affect is very much an immediacy between the performers and the judge. And no matter if the judge has seen you before or this is the first time, the judge is always open to what the performers have to bring.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. I'll add to it also that size does not always matter. Big band, small band, medium-sized band. It's about creating effect, and there are ways to do that with any size of band. It just has to be planned for and executed. So we'll talk about some of those things tonight, but a lot of people will say, Richard, we don't have a chance against these big bands because we're only maybe 40 wind players or something like that. And I say that there is nothing, and I think Marie and Randy would agree with me, there's nothing that judges love more than having a surprise happen on the field. And if a small group comes out and kills it, and maybe they're not as loud as one of the bigger groups, but it doesn't matter. It's about what they did with their time on the field. And so that's something that always bothers me when people say, well, it's just for big bands, because it's really not.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you go to some musicals and the casts are bigger than others, but it doesn't mean that the musical with the smaller cast is less effective.
Right.
Right.
It's how they use that time on stage.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So I think one of the other things too, a lot of times is that, would you say, have you ever had somebody say to you in a critique or something, well, maybe you just don't understand jazz, or you don't like it, or you're a person who prefers symphonic music. We know you don't like jazz. So, I mean, that's happened before, probably, where we have possibly designers or directors that think that we just are not open. And I love the word open. That's a great term, Marie, the word open to wanting to be entertained and, just be provoked to just be affected by something. I think that's really, truly our job when we're doing that particular caption is to react. And
excuse me. And so often, people don't realize that the judges are tasked with studying all of the forms of music. I'll tell you a cute little story. When I was a very young judge, I was handed a book called Jazz for Dummies by one of the groups I was judging because I wasn't into jazz. And that has stuck with me it's still on my bookshelf. Okay? But judges are supposed to study all forms of art, all forms of music, and be open to whatever is being presented. And we will engage in dialogue between each other after a performance if there is something we don't understand. That's how we grow.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Richard? Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, that I guess it's kind of like choosing a meal. You may love Italian, you may love Mexican, but we don't get to decide what's served to us by a certain group. What we look at is how they present that plate to us. And maybe that's not maybe jazz isn't one of our things, or really serious, like minimalist music maybe is not one of our favorite things, but that to an effect judge, that really can't matter.
Right.
You got to look at how the group is bringing you what they're serving and how they're serving it. And that's what we have to react to, even if it's not our favorite kind of music.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to remind those of you out there that are watching this session, you're more than welcome to post questions in the Q&A, and we'll all be monitoring those. So feel free to throw those questions in, and we will interrupt on occasion to get to those questions. So please, as you have questions, even if it's not what we're talking about, we'll find a way to carve it into the course of this evening's session. So I'm just going to throw some terms out there, and I want you guys to talk about them a little bit from a standpoint of whether they belong on the visual side or the music side. Okay. And these are forms of just design terminology or design elements: orchestration, variety, pacing, texture, horizontal development, vertical, form, mood, harmony, dissonance, primary, secondary, split focus, and color. Richard, tell me, are all those things just visual things?
Well, Randy, for those of us that are musicians, a lot of the terms you just read are musical terms. But when you talk about orchestration, and this is something that, I had to learn becoming an effect judge, is visual orchestration is just as important as music orchestration. And so now when I look at a fantastic drill with amazing color guard placement, and the way that they kind of keep our minds working and our hearts working by where they place people on the field, to me, that's amazing visual orchestration. So I think a lot of those terms that you just read kind of go both ways. I think that form also, there's form in music, but Marie, certainly there's all kinds of form and visual that you know a lot better how to talk about that than I do when on the visual side, but I try. I try to talk about it.
Every word that you read is a visual term as well. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I spend a lot of time talking to directors about the fact that they know how to do all this. It's all in their wheelhouse, but they're intimidated by the visual side. And often, we're so happy to get a color guard instructor. We say, just go out and do whatever you want to do. No. You know the musical color. You know what you want to see. You know the contouring of the music and how the music should be presented. And the directors, I don't think, give themselves enough credit for understanding these visual terms. In visual, they break it up a little bit. Some of those things are judged by the ensemble judge, like orchestration, but everything you read relates to general effect. And one of the reasons that, many avenues are going with an overall general effect sheet, because there is no division.
Right.
It's all about the visual musicality. It's all about the staging of the music. It's all about the presentation of the music. And as a visual judge, you might be surprised to hear me say that, but it's all about the music. And that's the driver. Okay. But every term you mentioned, we don't have time to go into the definition of each term, but every term you mentioned is a visual and musical term.
Would you guys say that every term is one that requires great thought and consideration ahead of time from a standpoint of your planning? Because if you're thinking about like a movie script and how the soundtrack, how the composer puts the music to the movie, my guess is that that particular person has to study that movie pretty well to get an understanding of what the mood is that's trying to be created, rather than letting it happen by happenstance. And would you guys say that a lot of times, a lot of the issues that you see in programs are the fact that could be the result of just a lack of forethought and planning? I know we can get into that with color guard transitions big time. I'm sure, right, Marie? That's a whole nother,
Yes.
that's another novel.
Yes.
But would you say that that's sometimes the case?
I would say it's often the case, and one of our biggest errors, because one of the first things we have to do after we assess our situation, what our goals are. Each band has a different goal. If your goal is state championship, or your goal is performing at football games, you have different criteria to your season than the band that wants to be nationally competitive. Different ball game. So assessing your goals and your situation is one thing, but and immediately we're going to create our horizontal plan. And I hope that those listening will tune in to the marching part of the Conn-Selmer Institute, because they'll talk about how to make a production sheet, how to make a storyboard. But horizontal planning is, if you have to perform for 7.5 minutes, those are the rules. Why not have a show that's 8 minutes So you're covered, but you're not rehearsing 11 minutes worth of show. So the horizontal plan, the timeline, if we know we're going to perform for 8 minutes, we know that the opener can be 3.5, the second production can be 2, et cetera. So you have to horizontally plan the show. And, the vertical comes later. The vertical is the artistry. But it's also called pacing, which is what Richard wanted to talk about too, right?
Yeah, that's that to me as a judge, and I'm sure you two would agree too. I mean, no matter how much we have talked about pacing over the years, it seems that people, especially young directors, still struggle with the idea of pacing. And I do, I don't really think it's anyone's fault. I just think that in the band director situation today, especially coming out of COVID, I mean, look at how little time we have to plan anymore. Look at how little time we have to rehearse.
Right.
So I think we need to be really smart about, and Marie was talking about that horizontal line, but I always want to say to a few bands, you're trying to do a horizontal line that the Blue Devils would do,
Yeah.
and that's probably not going to work for your band. It wouldn't work for my band,
Right.
So you have to be really smart. And Randy, you were talking about Scott Chandler a minute ago, and we're looking forward to having him as a guest for Conn-Selmer Institute Connect. But one of the things that I heard Scott say once, and I thought it was just so profound, even though it's simple, he said, someone asked him, how do you decide what show you're going to do? Do you pick a show that you love or whatever? And he goes, oh, I never pick a show that I love or that I want to do. He goes, I look at the members that we're going to be putting this show together for. And after I get to know all those members, what they're capable of, et cetera, that's when we decide on what kind of show we're going to do. And I just thought that made so much sense, because there are groups that I think just try to do too much, and especially some of the smaller groups, and you really don't have to. You can keep it simple, go from thin orchestration to thick orchestration. Even with a small band, we're going to hear the difference. And some people still say, well, but our biggest moment isn't going to be as loud as Broken Arrow's biggest moment. Well, I keep telling them it doesn't matter, because guess what? Broken Arrow is not on the field with you. You're the only one on the field, right? And they may have come before or come after, but it's about your time right there. And you show us the different dynamic ranges that your group has. And if you show us that nice range, and from a variety standpoint too, I think you're going to be in great shape. But the main point I'm trying to get is pace your group so that, number one, they can do it, so they can pull off the show, because training is so important. But also pace your group so that the kids can understand it and they can go, oh, here comes a big moment. Okay, we got to gear up for this, or now we can relax a little bit of what the kids need to understand how that all works. And if you throw too many things at them, it just gets really, really confusing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people frame, I know that marching bands often frame, they're trying to emulate drum corps that they see. They're trying to design that way. The thing that we have to remember as educators is that we don't get the luxury of spending 12 weeks with several groups of judges that we know we're going to see eventually down the end of the road and have those conversations. We may see one panel one week and never see them again. And the next time we do see them is going to be state finals. Right. So it's very, very important that clarity, that your ideas are well thought out, and that there's clearness to, and I'm not talking about the performance. Judges can read through performance if it's readable. They can understand that the show's going to develop their time, right? Yeah. But if you're doing a show that just doesn't, they can't get it, and they, trust me, we all want to get it as adjudicators. We want to understand your show. If we can't understand it in a 10-minute period of time or a 7 or 8 minute period of time, as Marie was saying, that's a scary place to be. So you have to be as clear. And I always used to ask other people to look at our show, because I live with it every day, right? Of course I understand it. Just because you understand it, you're dealing with a lot more information and a lot more repetitions of seeing the program every day, as opposed to somebody who's walking in and seeing it for the first time and trying to assess the value to it based on the criterion. So that's also tough. Marie, do you have a idea about that as well?
I do. First of all, yes, it's a short period of time. You have 10 minutes to tell your story. So we're not going to do Ben-Hur, and we're not going to do the Titanic. Concept is really very important, and the ability to tell that story. You have a minute to engage the audience when you start. So as my good friend Michael Cesario would say, tell us what you're going to do, set it up, and do it.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Beginning, middle, end. Beginning,
middle, and end.
Yeah.
And so that's all part of that plan. That's all part of that pacing. And when I'm going to give a clinic for directors, I Google pacing. And I'm glad you brought up the film, because the movie industry comes up. If you Google pacing, you'll see all these YouTube clips about how to put the show together, how to write an effective screenplay, act 1, act 2, act 3, it's all there. So as much as you want to learn and as much time as you want to take to look at that, they tell you how to do storyboards. It's, this is all available to everybody, besides within our own activity. But the critical thing in what you both said to me was the engagement of the audience. This is not private art. This is public art. You don't have the opportunity to hand out librettos or, see the judges before or after to tell your story. We have to get it. And the only way we're going to get it is if the performers understand it and have been trained to handle it. So back to what Richard said, my whole thing about the band director, and flipping back to what you said about the band director being prepared. How much time do you have? Have you taken your calendar and laid this out? How many times a week do you rehearse? Should we use props? That's time. Should we change plume colors? That's time. Anything you layer on is additional time. So knowing upfront what you have, what your budget is, what your resources are, what your parental help is. If you don't have people to carry out the drum major's podium, you don't have people to carry out props and I hate to be such a realist, but that's the realistic part of the band director's job, right? Especially in a COVID year. You're going to have less time. So you have to devote enough time to the basic techniques, and what you want the performers to show the audience in those 8 or 10 minutes. And then if you have time to layer other things on, great.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things to that. We talk about the what and the how all the time, right? We talk about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Right.
But what I'd ask directors to think about, especially directors of smaller groups, is to get to the why, not just the what and the how, but why. If like Marie said, if you have a group of 20 winds and you're trying to play the score from Ben-Hur, well, why?
Right.
Right. And so you don't want to judge at any point in your show going, why did you make that decision? Because that doesn't look like it's best for your group. Mm-hmm. Or it's not allowing your group to sound the way they could sound. All right. So along with that, what in the hell, just think ahead, like Marie said, and early on think about, okay, well, if we're going to try to do this as our opener, why? Why are we picking that music? And if we're going to pace it this way, why are we doing that? Why do we think that this big moment is going to have an impact? And I'll tell you, sometimes I thought these cool intellectual moments that we were doing were so cool. And then I'd bring parents in and say, what do you think? And they're like, yeah. And I'd be like, oh man, so it's just, you have to really think what Marie said is so true. It is not personal art, it's for the masses. Yeah. And the masses, including the judges, need to understand that. And then the second thing, just real quick, I know we're going to touch on this a little bit more, but your kids also have to be prepared to learn how to achieve effect. You can write effect, both musically and visually, or a combination of the two. But if your kids have not been prepared to perform to an effective degree, then you're even going to struggle, even though the show may be written beautifully. And we all talk about, well, sometimes we hate marching band because we have to play so loud, and no one hates that worse than me. I guarantee it. No one hates that worse than me. But I'm telling you, it's the game we play, guys. And if I'm telling you, and I would have done this totally different 30 years ago, but if I have a group of 30 wins right now, man, I'm working airflow studies with them from day one. And somehow we are going to get a huge sound that people are not going to believe when we get out there. Instead of just saying, oh, we got a small band, so we're going to always sound small. Okay, so whatever group you have, you got to make sure they're prepared. And I'm sure Marie could talk on the visual side of that as well. If you can't handle the drill move that's going to do the effect,
Right.
it's not going to be effective. So
It's not going to be effective.
Absolutely. So Marie, when we're talking about, obviously you've evaluated a lot of color guards in your day. What do the small bands with smaller color guards, 8 or less, what do they do? Do they need to look at things like Richard probably would look at soloist and varying things that way? How do you do it? Do you look at field coverage? How can you be effective with a small color guard?
You can be effective with a small color guard several ways. One is don't keep them too close together. We're often afraid to put them 6 or 12 steps apart, which you can do. And so, with a smaller band, I assume we're going to be between the 35-yard lines to begin with.
Yep.
And so even with 8 flags, if you put them 12 steps apart, you can get more field coverage. You also want to seriously consider the equipment. They don't need flags that are this big. They need big flowing flags. Yes. And, if they have, picture a dress with a flowing skirt, they can use as part of their routine. If you take a big flowing skirt and a larger flag, especially a swing flag, which is easier to manipulate, you can fill a lot of visual space. Think about the bands you've seen where the color guard looks all mushed together. That's because they don't have the correct space between them. Color is another way to make a small guard look larger, because a brighter color or a more dynamic color will also fill space. So those are some ways to do it. You have to really consider, putting them in the same color, and the flags should all be the same, not necessarily taking 2 of them just to be rifle, unless it is a solo. Quite often the kids want to be able to do that. You have 2 kids that know how to twirl a rifle, but you only have 8. So how do we feature that? Well, you take the other 6 flags and create a stage and let the 2 rifles be the soloists, the duet that hopefully would match the musical statement at that time. So, and, you sequence them, bring them in one at a time. There's plenty of tricks for that.
So Richard, Marie, you guys both talked about, it all comes down to choices, obviously. What colors you pick, what music you pick, what design staff you pick. So talk a little bit about the identity of the group. Does that impact the way that the performers are portrayed? And like I could definitely say, that there are groups that if they play extremely well, and always seem to always have groups that play really well. Carmel would be an example. Color and texture would be something that I would say was always an identity, because I've known you for so long, in terms of what you try to do with the orchestration musically. Is identity play a role in the effectiveness of a program, do you guys think?
Boy, musically, I think absolutely. I mean, let's just be honest here. There are sounds that people know of around the country. Whether we're talking about drum corps or whether we're talking about marching bands. Hebron is another great example. When the Hebron band comes out, I'm at the edge of my seat because I can't wait to hear that sound, and if for some reason Hebron came out and didn't sound like that, I'd be really disappointed. So as far as establishing your identity, I think it's super important. But Randy, sometimes, and I think you would agree with this, sometimes it's hard to maintain your identity once you've set that standard. Because how many times have we judged drum corps and we said, oh, well, they're not quite as good as they were last year. We still gave them a 99.8, but they're not quite, what we're saying. I mean, there's always,
it works
something.
against, it works against you in some ways. Yeah. Marie,
And
what
I
about?
think- I think for the bands that aren't nationally involved, they may not even know who Hebron is.
Sure.
For the bands that aren't nationally involved that might be watching, in visual, we call it style. If a band has style, and I can think of many small bands from Kentucky that have style. They have a certain style in the way they carry themselves, in the way they wear their uniforms, in the way that they march. They used to do that knee pop in Kentucky before they stepped off. That's style. And that's their identity. When you see, if you go to Kentucky Marching Band Championships, you're going to see some good marchers because they have style. And that is on the general effect sheet, style. And so that identity can come from within the band itself and within their own marching style and the way that they carry themselves and present themselves. I've often used that word in complimenting a small band, especially.
Yeah, when you hear a smaller group that achieves a sonority of sound, that director and that group of kids have been working their tails off on long tone exercises, the flow studies, balance corrals, all those kind of things to get that sound, and when you hear that kind of work, that immediately, I think the same thing, Marie, with I'll listen to small groups and I'll immediately say, all right, you guys sound great. Let me just get that out of the way right here. Right. You guys, I only count 25 wins and you sound awesome. I can tell you're working on tone. I can tell you're listening to each other, And so immediately they made an impression and there's their style, I guess,
and
musically.
That's part of effect. It's so important that the effect can come from the performer, and it does come from, it's the only way to communicate it. Yep. I'll often say on a tape, those marching basics really paid off, and today is payday.
Yep.
And they know I'm going to give them credit because they did those marching basics. So often a director will get a drill, over Pieware or whatever, however he gets the drill, and he teaches it to the kids and they don't know how to do an arc burst, or they don't know how to snake the form or whatever it is that person has written for them because they didn't do it in basics. And so it can't be effective because it's not achieved. And, achievement is something I definitely wanted to make sure I brought up in today's conversation.
And that's
without achievement, there isn't effect.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's a perfect segue. Before we do that, though, I've got a question here from Adam Hancock. He's saying, I've been judging locally for a while, but have only recently started being asked to judge effect. What is the single best thing that I can do between now and the fall to make myself a better effect judge, or as a band director to help myself be a better designer or instructor for creating effect? Great question.
Okay, I have a thought. I'm always nervous to say this. I guess it's okay. Watch great movies.
Yeah.
Go look at great pieces of art.
Yeah.
You know, go listen to wonderful recordings or watch even TV shows. And I'll give you an example of a movie, and I'm not going to be specific because I don't want anyone to take it the wrong way. But if you watch the movie Blazing Saddles, okay, there's a moment, and I know you all know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
There's a moment where we are on the floor losing it because we're laughing so loud. And it may sound silly, but go back and study that scene around that campfire. It is pacing to the max. It is pacing. You know, I mean, I even get goosebumps thinking about that because it is the ultimate. And we used that in a DCI clinic once with DCI judges, you know, and everyone was cracking up laughing, but then we showed it to them and they were like, oh my gosh, you're right. It is. It's perfect effect. So there's a lot of movies out there, not just, you know, and I'm not saying have your kids watch that movie, but especially nowadays. But I'm just saying there are great movies that have moments of effect like that. Just watch the way the director or the writer builds tension and then how they release that tension. I think sometimes we can learn from that as much as just watching videos of drum corps and bands.
That was part of my training when I became a judge. We had to say what our favorite movie was, our favorite stage play, our favorite musical, because we had to be exposed to all those things. And I agree.
Yeah, I often wonder, we all know that movies are shot out of sequence. At least I would hope that everybody knows that they don't start at the beginning and just go straight through. Yeah. And it often worries me sometimes when we're in the race against the clock and we really don't know how the story's going to end. And we already talked about, it's like the Oreo cookie, the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Yeah.
How we say hello, how we sustain interest, and then how we say goodbye. And if we don't have any idea and we're racing against the clock just to get the show on the field, but we don't know what the ending is going to be yet, not good. So, you know, there are times when maybe your visual designer or your arranger has a really good idea of what the beginning and the end is going to be. Maybe they need help with the middle. It's okay to write out a sequence. Obviously, you can't always do that with the drill. Probably can't do it at all because of the way the staging works, but you certainly can do it musically. You could certainly do it with the written color guard work. You could certainly do it with the drum book. That's 3/4 of your battle right there, right? So certainly something to think about. Great answers. So we're going to delve into the performer. And I think that there's always a large concern about the what. And Richard and I can speak to this because we were the ones asking those questions. Are you recognizing this? Are you recognizing that? Heck, we probably asked Marie several times during the course of our careers. But the bottom line is, especially in a high school marching band setting, the performer, even regardless of what the ratios are in terms of point weighting and everything else, I'm going to say this, and you guys may disagree. I think 70% of the onus is on the performer because of the fact that panel may only see it once, because of the fact that it's a very short season relative to what drum corps or WGI season is like. I think it's really, really important that the performer is 70% of the equation. And that goes back to what Richard was talking about, understanding your personnel. And as he was saying, Scott Chandler was, write the show for the kids you have. Don't write all these soloists and the soloists don't have characteristic sounds. As Marie was saying, don't write a big rifle feature for 2 kids that don't have the training to back it up. You're just, you know, many times, somebody said this to me one time, that marching band is all about smoke and mirrors. It's all about hiding your weaknesses and presenting your strengths. And I think that's very, very true in many instances. So, but let's talk about the performer and excellence and achievement. And Marie, go ahead and chime in.
Well, you know, the way that most competitive sheets are designed, like Richard said, is the what and the how. So it's what the performers are given to do and how well they do it. But those captions bleed, those subcaptions bleed. And so you're right. I think the performer is, you know, if we had to put a percentage to it, 70% for sure, maybe even a little more. And the directors have heard this till they're sick of hearing it, but it's all about basics. It's all about training. we can't ask the color guard to dance if they've never had a technique class. And they don't have to be trained in formal ballet, but they have had to have the exposure to it and the training for it. And so besides doing if we have a camp, or, you know, we have to take at least a half an hour of each of our rehearsals and work on basic techniques, musically and visually. And we don't always do that. We have 10 pages of drill to learn, so we'll skip the basics today.
Yep.
Bad move. Better to learn 3 less sets and do it properly. Because if you have the correct basics set up, those are the moves you're going to use in the drill, because that's what you've communicated to the person that's writing the drill. It's kind of boring if you keep everybody 2 steps apart in the whole drill, if you maintain the same interval.
Yeah.
If you don't alter space and speed, you don't get texture and variety. But if they haven't been trained to understand what spatial awareness is, they won't be able to achieve it. So sounding like a broken record, basics, basics, basics.
It's the same way with music. Exactly the same way with music. I really believe that the better your group is at the basic, what I call the 3 or 4 basic exercises for winds or for percussion or whatever, the better off your band is going to sound. If your band can't sound good on a long tone, on an F concert long tone, then, you know, how can you expect them to sound great on the first movement of someone's symphony? You know, so I think a lot of times we get in a hurry, and myself included, I'm guilty as charged of that. We get in a hurry and we think that, okay, we have to get to those 10 pages of drill. Or, you know what, I got to get my kids through the end of this music. You know what? You really don't. You really don't. What you need to do is make sure that your kids go home better than what they were than when they came that day. And if they continue to get better, then eventually your show's going to be great too. But you can't just work on the show once you start to get the show out on the field. You have to continue to work those basics. I know I had some directors making fun of me the first time we won nationals, because we were doing a rehearsal in the afternoon before national finals, and we spent 30 minutes on an F concert. And I had a couple directors from Wisconsin come down and say, "You are crazy, man." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "You know, you have a big show tonight, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, but did you hear the F?" And they're like, "Yeah, we know it wasn't perfectly in tune, but wow, man, come on. You only got an hour and a half left." And I tried to explain to them, if even on the last day of the season, if we can't do that F concert, how are we going to impress anyone tonight? You know? And so they kind of shook their heads and walked away and acted like I had 10 heads. But I just think that it's that important. I could not agree with Marie more.
We've got a question that I think this relates to definitely relates to what we're talking about, from Chris Wing. He says, "Can you talk about your process for audio visual coordination in your designs? What types of things are part of your discussion? Additionally, can you talk about how important that is to you as an effect judge?"
I can tell you what we go through because I'm in the middle of that with numerous groups right now. But whether it was Cavaliers when I was working for them, or the bands I work with now, we get the music set first, but all our visual people have a lot to do with what music we're going to use. They have a big, huge impact on making the decision for music. And a lot of times, some of our visual folks will say, "We need to do this piece. We're doing this concept. We need to do this piece." And I'll be like, "Okay, I trust you," even though I'm thinking, why in the world would we do that piece? You know, because I know they have a reason. And so then after you get the music written, that's what I think sometimes people forget about, is after the music's written, that's when it's time to really have the design meetings and sit down with your visual people and your color guard people and say, what do you think, guys? Does this music work for you? Do you have an effect here? Do you have something that can work? We have a drill move that can work, or do I need to change the music here? Right? And see, I think a lot of people skip those steps, and they think by just talking over the winner that they've got everything figured out. And I just don't believe you can do that. There's too much stuff to cover. And so after that music is written, I think you go right back to your visual people and say, now, how do we stay on the same page with all this? So it doesn't look like we were writing drill and music in separate rooms. I hope that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And the tool that I use is called a production sheet, where we have the measures of the music written down, what emotion we feel when we hear that part of the music. The color guard puts their ideas, the drill writer puts their ideas, the director puts his ideas. And unless you have a production sheet and you're all on the same page, that's how a show gets written. So first we have the storyboard, we talk through the horizontal design, then we break down that piece of music and say, okay, we're going to do this here, and this here. If the visual people can't visualize anything with the music that's been chosen, we have a problem.
Yep.
So that's another tool that I know they'll cover at the Conn-Selmer Institute in the marching workshop. But again, you can get this information from a lot of different people.
Yeah.
However you want to lay it out.
Yeah. And I think from a judging perspective, it's really important that we understand the process that visual designers go through to motivate themselves to create what they're hearing. If they can't, it would be like your percussion writer not really being able to write something in 6/8 because it's weird, it's too slow. He can't really come up with ideas. Richard, I'm sure you've been in situations where it's like, I got to compose this. I just don't know what it is we're trying to communicate.
Right.
It's all about, it comes back to the motivation. And if you don't understand the motivation as a designer and as a staff, and then the performers don't understand what the motivation is, then the judge doesn't stand a chance. That's when you might as well be handing out term papers to explain what's going on, because it's not going to work. And sometimes it's as simple as putting the right people in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's the right combinations of textures and sounds at the right time, or the right combinations of colors. But folks, it all comes back to planning, and it all comes back to conversations, and that's
communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. It really, really, really does. That's a great question.
We would have moments when we thought at Carmel that we were all set with an idea. And then we'd get up and walk out of the room, and Rosie Queen would look at us and go, "You guys don't know what you're doing." And we're like, "What?" She's like, "No, I heard all you just talked about, and you think you got it figured out. You don't have it figured out." And you know what? We'd go back and sit down, and she was always right, because she's like, "You're not thinking about this. You're not thinking about this." And she would get us to reality. And so it's always good to have someone like that on your staff, even though they'll drive you crazy. I mean, you got to be thinking about reality.
And both of you have talked about excellence and achievement, and that in and of itself is an effect, right? I mean, excellence is excellence, and it's effective. It's automatically effective. It's the one.
Yeah. It's on every score sheet I've ever seen.
Yeah. And it's probably
has an effect.
Exactly. And it's probably the one thing that an audience understands the same way a judge often understands.
Yes.
And that's why it's so very, very, very important. So when we're talking about that next level of artistry, and Richard, you had said this before, and Marie, you said this too, it all comes back to fundamentals. If the kids can almost be on automatic pilot with their training, then they can take it to that artistry level, which is where we're, it's the 2 + 2 = 5. It's the synergy of the effect. It's being able to maximize those moments, right? So you can't do that if you haven't trained your kids.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Because on the score sheets are words like confidence, poise, esprit de corps. That's all part of what the performers are being rewarded for. And the only way to receive that reward is achievement.
Yep, absolutely. So engaging audiences, let's finish up with this. This can be a hot button topic. And let's face it, we all, all three of us have judged DCI. We know that the concepts have changed over the years to trying to be more attractive or appealing to an audience, as well as the score sheets themselves. So is it possible for a group to be effective with an audience and not necessarily competitively effective with the judging panel, and vice versa?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I still remember going into critiques with certain drum corps who would say to me, I can't believe you had us that low in effect. Could you not hear the crowd going crazy the whole time? And I was like, yeah, I heard him. I heard him. But did you also notice that since you played loud your entire show, they cheered the loudest the first time you were loud, and that cheer kind of faded as the show went on because they realized, hey, we've heard this before. We've heard this volume before. So now what do you got for us? And so, yeah, I think it's tough too. The sheets are so demanding in some ways, but the audience is demanding too. The audience they want the goosebumps. And I think 9 times out of 10, if the audience gets some goosebumps, most of the judges probably will too.
Yes.
It comes down to that communication piece, right? I mean, different people go to Broadway musicals and they all have different backgrounds, different cultures. And I've seen people from strictly different cultures crying over the same musical moment or visual moment, because it has an impact. And so the key is obviously communicating, and to be able to do that freely and organically, you got to have the training. I think we said that once or twice tonight.
Once or twice. And
once or
you
twice.
have to have a concept that will engage as well.
Mm-hmm.
People don't come to a football field to watch the kids do a depressing show.
Thank
Okay?
you. Thank you for saying
So I
that.
just wanted to get that in too.
Thank you for saying that.
Especially in context, right? In context of what we've just been through.
Exactly. Yeah.
So context.
So
does
no
matter.
pandemic shows.
Yeah. Yes, no.
So there's a question here from David Gonzalez. What are some examples of effective and powerful musicals or movies to get inspired by?
I got one. The end of the first act of Wicked, when they fly the Wicked Witch up to the top of the proscenium, and the music of Defying Gravity. First time I saw that, I ran out of the theater at intermission crying my eyes out. I mean, I lost it. It was so, I still get goosebumps talking about it.
Yeah.
So there's one example.
And anything Harold Prince.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Dudamel conducting the Hispanic Youth Orchestra playing Mambo. That's an amazingly visual, interesting thing as well. You can find that on YouTube. It's amazing. It's just absolutely 2.5 minutes of pure joy. It's really, really great. Well, guys, it's been great. Thank you so much. We're at the bewitching hour. I think we got all the questions answered. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we can put you in touch with Marie as well. She is a Conn-Selmer clinician, and we're so proud that she's with us.
Thank you.
Certainly proud that Richard has joined us once again. Please continue to check out the Facebook page, Marching Arts Educators, and sign up. We're 450 members strong, and we get more every week. So you can ask questions on that as well. So glad you've been able to be with us. And replays of this for friends who didn't get to see it tonight but registered, they'll be able to access it on the Facebook page, the Marching Arts Educators Facebook page, in a few days, as well as they'll get probably a link emailed to them if they registered for the event. So again, thanks so much. Marie, stay warm up there in Chicago. Yep. Go White Sox. Richard, go Reds.
Go Cardinals. I guess I got to say that.
All right, all. Take care now.
We'll see you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.